Hi, it's Mimi Chen. We're checking in with an award-winning TV and comic book writer, and as far as how to pronounce his name, I think we should let him do it.
The very first question I have
Okay.
um, is how do you pronounce your name?
Is okay. It's Pornsak, so it's pretty much how it sounds, and then Picheshote.
Picheshote.
Yep. Picheshote. Yep.
Oh my gosh. And I hate to say it, you know how people's minds are.
Yeah.
Have you had to deal with this all your life?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I was lucky though. I went to high school in Thailand. And
Oh,
and
okay.
Pornsak is kind of like Frank in time. It's like a traditional name that nobody really has anymore. So it was
Right.
still a little bit of a curiosity that I had this like older kind of name, but it didn't like get me stuffed in closets or lockers or anything like that. And then I got to college and everyone sort of matured a little bit more.
Right.
And so then it was another curiosity that sort of made me stand out. But it's an interesting thing. Like I've actually had a conversation recently that was just like, if you went to high school in America, you probably have an anglicized name. Like you probably would have just had the pressure to have an anglicized name. And I was just like,
yeah.
I never really thought about that before. I never really thought about that before. Like that, what difference that would have made. Because my name being distinctive has helped me. It has been a pain in the ass in some ways and has helped me out in other ways. So there's a whole different shade of my life in a different way if I went to high school in America, and I don't know, maybe I'd be like, I don't know, Paul or something like that. I don't know.
I think it's a tendency for a lot of people who, are immigrating from another country to try to blend in.
Yeah.
So did it ever cross your mind to change your name at all?
It never, it's funny it never crossed my parents' mind. And so I lived in America until I was 12. And it never crossed their mind to give me a more anglicized name. And then high school would have really been the pressure, those 4 or 5 years of high school. Coming out of in college, it was of curiosity, and I had a couple songs named after me because they liked my name so much. Like it was a plus in college. And then after college, I think entering the workforce, people ask like, oh, you've never thought to. And my whole thing is, which I always think is true, is that like attracts like, and I am friends with assholes. And so, and if they found out my name was Pornsak after 20 years or 10 years of name Paul, they would never let me hear the end of it. Like, I found out I've known my friend Lee for 15 years, and I found out his real name is Leonard, and I give him grief about it constantly, that he's a Leonard. Because he's so not a Leonard, he's a Lee. But oh, do I love calling him Leonard now. So I never thought, I was just like, sooner or later, people are going to find out, so I might as well. I used to joke, like it's kind of like the reverse of prison rules. You got let everybody get their best shot. If they see you keep standing, then you kind of win their respect and you kind of keep going. So yeah, but I don't know if I would have felt that way if I went to high school in America, and it could have given me a whole different perspective on my life.
You know what first occurred to me? I was looking at your name saying, this has got to be a stage name.
Well, here's my thing about that is I think you have a very different perception of me if you think I'm the kind of person who looks in a mirror and says, oh, we should call that Pornsak. Like, that's a very different perception of the person that I am.
I just can't help it. I'm sorry.
No, I get it.
It's so great though. And you work in a career, which I think kind of lends itself to that aspect.
I mean, I've definitely, what's really would be funny is that occasionally there's a new, I don't know, whatever group of fans who like discover my work and all that sort of stuff. And they'll be like, what's going on with his name? So like, I remember, I was editing a book and no one talked about the writer of their work. They were just like, what's going on with his name that's in the credits? Like, this is a PG book. And it's like,
that is awesome. So how did you get into the comic book field? Give me a background check of everything you've done until now.
Sure,
and then we can announce the good news that I discovered via Twitter.
Okay. I've been into comics my whole life. I read them sort of growing up. I mean, I guess the easiest way to look at it was, you know, I was born in America. I was born in New York, raised in New Jersey and Boston, all along the Northeast coast. And and during that time, I was into comics. I was casually into comics, maybe more so than the normal kid, but not like an enormous amount. I would say pretty
Mhm.
average. And when I was 12, my parents decided like, hey, we're gonna move to Thailand for a year. And so the family moved to Thailand, and then 1 year became 2 years, and 2 years became 3 years. And me and my sister slowly realized, like, oh, we just live in Thailand now. They didn't want an argument. They just decided to move us to Thailand and tell us it was like a long vacation. And during that time, I never had like, and I still have like elementary school yearbooks be like, see you in a year. And I never seen those people again. And
Oh,
and I have no idea what became of them. And but I think during that time, because I was kind of like ripped out of this culture that I knew, and we didn't have a ton of money, the things I had to connect myself to American culture were few and far between. Like when I lived in Thailand, we would get one English language movie a week would play on the television, and just like in a drive-in theater, you have to tune in on the radio to get the English soundtrack if you didn't want to hear it in Thai. There were like 2 movies that would hit theaters a month. So there wasn't a ton, and so it was during that time I got more into comics because comics was something cheap I could buy, and then I could read them over and over and over again, and that would kind of be my sort of lifeline to comics and television were really my lifeline to this life that I kind of like left and I didn't have access to anymore. And so that would I would eventually come back to America for college and all that kind of stuff, and I would slowly realize, oh, I want to tell stories for a living, and I didn't know how to do that and what that would
mhm.
become. And at the time, I was looking to do stuff in film. I was not looking to do stuff in comics because I wanted it was like I felt like it was my only hobby. I started off as a short story writer, expanded to film, and then it was like, oh, now reading prose and movies and watching television was all work. So I wanted to save comics as one thing I enjoyed. But a friend of mine had heard that Karen Berger, who was the executive editor of DC Comics Vertigo imprint, was looking for assistant editor, and he kind of told me all that. And he's like, I have no idea what those words mean, but I feel like you do. And it feels like you would enjoy this. And he's like, no, it would. I
Awesome.
would enjoy that. So I interviewed for that job. I was not looking for a full-time job. I was looking to freelance. I was doing that thing that you do when you're young. It's like, maybe I just need to just go without a net and see if I can do it. So I was just like, I'm doing it without a net. But then this job opening came along, and I was like, I don't know if I want this job, but I'm such a fan of Karen. I really want to say I met Karen Berger. So I went in for that, and then that job interview led to an editing test, which led to another job interview, and then she offered me a job as an assistant editor at DC Vertigo, and I would work there for 7 years. And after 7 years, the CCO of after that, it is around I think 2010, 2011, Warner Brothers was like, we should be making more money off of comic books. And so they reorganized the department and started what would become a media think tank uh, um, on the West Coast. And the CCO, the head of that think tank, recruited a bunch of us from publishing to sort of be a part of it. And I was one of those people. And then all of a sudden that led me to, and I was recruited because I knew stuff about the comic side. And then I would end up becoming part of that think tank, and I would slowly end up being sort of DC Comics' head of television. And so I would help develop the Arrowverse on the CW and a bunch of other shows. And that happened for a while. And I'd always wanted to sort of tell my own stories, and I was getting farther and farther away from that. And I think around the time when I was becoming a television executive, the thing I loved about comic book editing, it's still very boots on the ground. You're still very much working with the creative. When I was a television executive, it became so much about protecting the creative from all these other forces. And there was less less personal satisfaction for me. So I did that for a couple of years, and we sort of set up the DC TV division. And then I decided to step away to focus on my own writing, and that was writing for TV and comics. And I would write my first comic, which was a book called Infidel. I would start writing television, and both those careers happened almost exactly. I went through a period of like 2 years where nothing happened, and then both of them happened at the same time. And I've sort of been like
Wow.
trying to juggle these two careers ever since. And so The Good Asian was this nice thing where it kind of converged my like two careers, where The Good Asian was a book I very, very much wanted to do.
Uh-huh.
And because I had a background as a TV writer, it was not a leap to say, hey, why don't you adapt it to TV, as opposed to having someone else option it. My last book, Infidel, that book was optioned, and they brought other screenwriters in to adapt it. And now, I'd gone farther enough as a TV writer. They were like, no, I think you can adapt it. And that's kind of what brought us to sort of where this moment that we're at now, where I put this book out. It came out in I want to say 2021, or yeah, I think 2021 was when the first issue came out, and it was serialized. And the last year, the last collection came out. It's been very nice. The book has won some awards, and yeah, and all that sort of helped, adapting, moving it to TV, and working with James Wan's company, Atomic Monster, and the fine folks in MRC, and my managers over at 3 Arts, and sort of bringing this to television. And that kind of brings us up to date.
That is an amazing background. And I think it's very inspiring to see that you managed to go from being a kid in Thailand and then suddenly you're back in America.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, being a kid in Thailand, I never thought this was an option for me. I really, really never did. I remember writing, I never thought was an option. For the longest time, I've been writing since high school, and just short stories, but also just like journal entries. And I got to college and I found out I was good at it, but I always saw it as a phase that I was going through. And I think it was my summer of my sophomore year that I went home to Thailand and like stumbled on these old journals that I had. And even, 4 years prior to that, I was referring to writing as this phase I was in. And I realized this phase was like 4 years, and maybe it's my life, and I should sort of start to like pursue it. And it meant I had to really keep my nose to the grindstone, because I didn't know anybody in this industry. I mean, like, we didn't even have literature classes in my high school, because I went to high school in Thailand. So yeah, I never thought this was an option for me.
Well, now that you have, I mean, you have to explain to me exactly what this deal is. It sounds like they're taking your property, which is The Good Asian,
yes,
and converting it into like a real live action property.
Yeah. So the idea is I'm adapting it for television, with the fine folks at MRC, with James Wan and Atomic Monster, with 3 Arts. And MRC is a nice fancy studio. They did Ozark, they did The Great, they've done a ton of stuff that's coming out recently. And that's kind of where we sit right now. And we'll eventually get to the point where we'll get our nice attachments, and we'll go shopping for networks and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, right now we're developing it to TV is pretty much what's happening. Yeah.
So how involved in that process are you going to be? Are you going to be, looking at just, first of all, have you already written episodes? Are you going to start writing episodes, or are you going to look at some of the characters you have? I mean, what is The Good Asian all about? It sounded like it's a detective, right?
It is. So I call it The Good Asian. The Good Asian is a genre I made up called Chinatown Noir. And it's a detective story in the style of Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe, but featuring one of the first Chinese American detectives in America, as he, in classic noir fashion, stumbles upon goes looking for a missing girl, stumbles on a murder, stumbles on a conspiracy. But what it's really about is that he's traversing through 1936 Chinatown, which was the biggest population of Chinese Americans in America at that time. And it's during a time where there was an immigration ban against Chinese entering the country. And so it's about that. It's about that generation of Asian Americans that, who had to live during that time, and what is their sense of self during that time? What is their sense of community? What is their sense of being American? And how do they navigate that? And part of the reason why I wanted to choose 1936 to talk about it is I felt there were a lot of parallels between that experience then and our experience now. And one of the very uncomfortable and surreal experiences that I had when the book was coming out was, to prove just how timely it was, which is still weird when I think about it, was it came during the height of the anti-Asian hate sort of conversation we were having. So just for a note of just how like close to home it all hit, the week we announced the book was happening, that was the same week where I think it was like NBC had finally, like NBC, I feel like was one of the first news venues to be like, oh no, this is a, people have been yelling about it on Twitter for a while, but it wasn't
Right.
getting national news coverage. And that same week where it was getting national news coverage was the same week we were announcing the book. And so that became sort of this weird, I remember at the time it felt very surreal, but also very uncomfortable, because obviously the themes are very close, but it's not like I wrote this to talk about that, because that hadn't happened yet.
Right.
So a lot of it for me was, how do I talk about this book? Because I don't want to not talk about it too, because that's also part of the problem. And so it took me a while to sort of figure out how to talk about it, about how, what's happening now, and, certainly in 2021 was an extension of a history that we are not aware of, that's been since 1882. And what was happening in my book in 1936 is sort of an extension of that history. And even right now it is an extension of that history. But that's kind of what The Good Asian is about. So on the one hand, The Good Asian is a noir detective story trying to take a American genre and sort of say, like, hey, let's acknowledge the history for Chinese Americans and Asian Americans during that time, while still incorporating in that genre and that history. And in the process, hopefully we ask questions about Asian American identity. We try to ask, what does even that mean? The term Asian American, what are Asian American themes, which is a question that's very close to my heart. And also too, we talk about respectability politics. What is the good Asian? The lead character of Edison Hark, he's based off of he's inspired by the very real Achang Aperna, who was the inspiration for Charlie Chan. And I riff off a lot of that history. This is the very first, he's one of the first Chinese American detectives, which means he hailed from Hawaii, which was one of the first places to have sort of Asian American detectives. He was a detective who, because he had a certain amount of privilege, and because he had a certain amount of privilege, he could be a police officer. But what is his loyalty to his community, and can he actually be loyal to his community in that position of power? And so we ask all these questions kind of in the book. And so it's the attempt of using, in the stuff that I love, using genre to talk about these sort of bigger questions.
It's interesting. Oh, hang on a sec. Sorry,
Sure.
My dog is
No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Okay, you're annoying little mutt. Now, where did I put you? I have too many places. The dog
No
was
worries.
banging at the door, and
Yeah.
I was afraid he was going to start barking. But here's the deal. It's funny that you brought up Charlie Chan, because that was actually a name that first erupted in my mind. The idea of a Chinese American detective.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that you brought up the fact that, Asian, or I should say Chinese American people have been here since the 1800s.
Yeah.
And yet we're still portrayed as, being unable to speak English.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that's part of, that's part of the sort of the conversation of the book, and part of, like, I think a lot of that stuff too is, I think we're at this really interesting moment, I think, where there's enough attention on sort of the Asian American experience and Asian American art and Asian American culture and Asian American identity, that it's all a little bit still, unfortunately, still wet cement in terms of defining what that is. And so one of the privileges of being able to put out work like this now, is to be part of a little part of that conversation about sort of what that is. And I think part of that conversation, and part of the struggles, I think, to define it, is because we aren't looking at the sum total of history. We aren't tracing back to, where did the model minority myth come from? How does it have to do with, one of the things I was embarrassed about was when I discovered the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Johnson-Reed Act. I was completely unaware of its existence. I was so unaware that when I discovered, I had to do extra research just to make sure I wasn't interpreting things wrong, and it's so not a part of the history that we're taught. But it's a huge part of in a way, it's a huge part of Asian American identity. We can't talk about Asian American identity without talking about that history as well. And so to me, that's a lot of sort of where this all comes from, is we have to incorporate and acknowledge that history to talk about sort of where we're at right now.
It's pretty interesting to think about what some of the older Asians must have gone through,
Yeah.
and it may have been a factor in your parents moving back to Thailand.
I think this is something that I've only come to terms with in the past year, is I have a very unique perspective. I'm an American, but I have a very unique perspective of America because my parents moved here and then moved back to Thailand. They kind of rejected the American dream. They thought it didn't work. They thought there were advantages to living in America. They got what they could get out of it and then left. And I don't really think I started realizing how differently that shaped my perspective of America until I started writing, until I started, writing my books and people started responding to them, that I realized like, oh, not everybody and it makes total sense. If most Asian Americans are here with parents who stayed here, so they just have a different perspective of America than I do, where I was raised by people who didn't believe America would accept everyone. And because they didn't believe America would accept everyone, they didn't stick around. And there's an argument that they were right. They were more financially successful when they went back home than they were when they stayed here. So these are things I'm just recently coming to in the past year or so. I'm realizing, oh, wow, my experience is different from other people's experience. And because of that, the way I look at America and these things, I look at it from a different angle.
It's really fascinating to me to see your perspective on your book, because I would almost feel like I'm talking to an author of a regular,
well,
almost that you could release your book as a regular book as opposed to a comic book.
Well, that was certainly the goal. The goal is to make a comic book that has all the aspirations of a novel, that has all the aspirations of literature. It's just got pictures in it too.
And, I recall in the early days of science fiction, how people used to label it as pulp and non-literary. And yet to me, there's some great works of science fiction that are quite admirable. I mean, you say that you read comics, but I'm sure you probably also read sci-fi as well.
I read it. I'm an avid reader. And listen, there's a ton of there's tons of great literary genre work. And I'm inspired by all, like Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler. Like, now we consider those writers literature, and it's something that I've always enjoyed, kind of like this blending of low and high culture. And hopefully we do that in the Good Asian, because there was a time, listen, again, people don't remember this because of history. There was a time where prose writing was seen as low culture when compared to poetry. Melville and Hawthorne had to argue of the merits of literature as prose as literature. Hawthorne was a romance. Hawthorne saw himself as a romance writer. Melville thought himself as a sea adventure novelist. They were genre writers. Poe was a horror writer. If you look at the roots of American prose fiction, they started with genre writers having to argue that they were in fact as literary than the poetry that was coming out from England and all the other poetry that was happening. So what I'm doing, and with comics, is all a part of that tradition of like this canon of like, this is real literature, and then other things kind of sneak in.
That is awesome. That is just so amazing that, you're trying to, up the level of a comic book.
Well, I will say that I don't know if I think there's a ton of other comics that are already doing this already. So for me,
Okay.
I'm just trying to hit that level of sort of stuff. And I think different people from different perspectives, I think, there's a ton of literary comic books out there. So I definitely can't take credit for inventing it. But I think, maybe there hasn't been as much of that from the Asian American perspective for an adult reader. Someone like Gene Yang is doing incredible work, which I also consider literary, but his oeuvre is more on the YA sort of side of things. So it might be a little bit more unique that I'm coming at it from a more adult, sort of more of a rated R kind of sort of perspective. But that's the other thing. Like, I don't think I'm inventing anything. I'm working in traditions I'm working in traditions that are established that might not be as apparent to some people as opposed to others. But I can't take credit for inventing anything.
You're working in a traditional vein, and yet you're trying to uncover the buried facts of
Yes,
life that
yes,
people have
yes.
never, been exposed to. And I think that's, an important thing, especially since, Asian American studies are now becoming a thing in
Yeah.
many universities.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing too. Like literary comics have always sort of been out there. I think now it's just more of us who are Asian American are using the traditions of literary comics to sort of to explore subject matter that's more personal to us.
So, what are your goals for the TV version of The
I
Good
mean,
Asian?
the TV version, I hope to do everything we did in the book. I hope we ask sort of the same questions. I hope that that fans of the book find it just as satisfying, but also are still surprised by it. So really, it's really taking the project of the book and bringing it to a bigger audience, and while without losing the original audience along the way. Well, everything there hopefully is, and listen, there's a lot of stages we have to go, right? I mean, now I joke that nowadays you don't know if you've got a green light on your show until you're in the middle of shooting episode 5 of that show, and even then they could fire you and bring somebody else. So you like the television business is at such a tenuous like sort of state right now. So who knows what's going to happen from here? But the ambition certainly is to take the themes of the book, the questions, all those questions I was just talking about, and ask them on sort of a wider stage.
I think that with the advent of all these streaming services with Netflix and Hulu and even Viki to expose, people to all kinds of Asian TV properties, yours would probably stand out because I don't think I've seen, too much in terms of, Asian American themes. Most of them are based, in Asia itself.
Yeah, and
Very
that is
Korean.
definitely, yeah, and I think that is definitely the goal too. Is that like, you know, for so long Asian and Asian American have been conflated, and certainly one of the goals for the Good Asian is, listen, there's a lot of great stuff and a lot of great comics you can read and a lot of entertainment you could read about Asia. There's so less about Asian American, and that was what I was really like, yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff about Chinese culture that I could have worked into the book, but I'm so much more interested in the Asian American culture that is distinct. And for me, there isn't enough out, and we're starting to see more of it, right? Everything Everywhere All at Once, like Minari, like we're starting to see more of that. But to me, that there's so much more we can do to fill that out of terms of just like what these Asian American perspectives and how is that different from the American perspective, but also how is that different from the Asian perspective and sort of what that looks like. And that's the thing that I'm sort of excited about. And the Good Asian is a way to use history to help illuminate what those distinctions are between Asian and American. History helps us say, like, this is what Asian American, these are some of the things that Asian American themes or Asian American works can be about or can explore.
It's pretty interesting to me. I've been following a lot of different TikTok channels, and some of them talk about all this history that I never heard about.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, I didn't know that happened. All these Asian people were wiped out and massacred. And
yeah,
it's
no,
like,
totally.
wow.
And like, and all the different ways people are trying to address, like, I loved Interior Chinatown. I'm so looking forward for that show to come out and to sort of see how that does. And I know Charles Yu is involved in that. So like, I'm really excited about this time that we're in where, that people are not just talking about Asian Americans or not just talking about Asians, but actually really asking like, well, what sets apart Asian Americans? What does Asian American mean? What does it mean to be part Asian and part American? A friend of mine termed it as life between the hyphen or life within the hyphen. And I do think that is the thing that's interesting me the most right now.
Pretty amazing. Well, I'm really happy to see that you're so enthusiastic and looking forward to the completed work. I mean, how long do we have to wait for this?
I mean, nowadays with television, nobody knows how long you have to wait for television. I don't think anybody knows anymore, especially now that we're in the streaming state. Like, there used to be a day with the network TV show, everything happened in cycles. You found an answer within a year. Nowadays, though, streaming takes as long as it takes apparently, and
Right.
people have all this money and they're just willing to spend money until they're not willing to spend it anymore. All I know is that, like, I'm working on the sequel to The Good Asian, the sequel to The Good Asian, the
Uh-huh.
graphic novel, and a lot of the stuff that I'm doing, the success of The Good Asian has helped me try to do what I'm doing in other stories too. So right now at the moment, I'm writing a book for DC, and it's a spin-off of Sandman. It's Sandman Universe Dead Boy Detectives. There's going to be a Dead Boy Detectives show on Netflix, I think sometime next year. I'm writing that, and it's about two sort of British ghosts, and it's a YA sort of horror book. But I'm using this opportunity to introduce Thai myth. I'm Thai Chinese, Thai Chinese American, and I'm using that as a opportunity to introduce Thai mythology into the Neil Gaiman sort of Sandman sort of mythology, so that that
Nice.
audience can kind of be exposed to that. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't. I'm doing that very consciously with the idea of, like, oh, there's a Dead Boy Detectives television show that's coming out next year, and even though that's already written and done and all that, like, if that's successful, then maybe they'll take some of the characters and bring it out to the big screen, and we'll get more, like, and for being Thai is different because, like, it's such a tiny portion of the Asian population, But so the idea of just some of that, like, usually the only time I see Thailand in anything is if they need a character to speak an obscure language. They suddenly go, like, I know Thai, and then the character will speak Thai very badly, and they'll say, like, I know fluent Thai all of a sudden, and that's generally the only time Thai culture pops up in American pop culture. So the idea of, like, introducing, like, Thai horror and Thai ghosts into the world of Sandman, into the mythology of Dead Boy Detectives, while there's a show out there, I can only hope that if that show goes to season 2, 3, and 4, they'll hopefully bring some of that on board. But that's kind of, the goal of, like, trying to take the success of the book and sort of see what else I can do to not necessarily repeat myself, but to bring, to explore things in different ways.
We're certainly looking forward to the TV series that was written by Pornsak, and we'll let you know when we do. It's Mimi Chen for ASAM News. Hi, it's Mimi Chen. We're checking in with an award-winning TV and comic book writer, and as far as how to pronounce his name, I think we should let him do it.